Hello, I'm Dr. Lapora here to talk to you about 7 ruthless habits of excellent CEOs. And I will say there are many leaders who ignore these habits, and that's why they're not excellent CEOs. They may be CEOs, but they're not excellent. So, all right, let's talk like we're in the same room, right? So, most CEOs do not fail because they're dumb. You're not dumb. But many CEOs fail because they stop growing faster than their problems. So for me, this is about a lot of things, but very importantly, it's about being proactive in your learning, proactive, engaging with a strategic lens, what's going on, not just in your organization, but outside around your organization. So we're going to walk through these 7 capacities of an excellent CEO. Not about fluffy theory, but what specific behaviors really make that difference. So, number one is that addiction to learning. The only way you're going to be able to get ahead of your problems, as I said earlier, is by being addicted to learning. So, it's not about your calendar being full, it's about what you're actually learning and able to apply in order to elevate your leadership and to elevate your organization. So this goes above and beyond scrolling, listening to a YouTube channel or post like this one, but it's about really going deep and setting aside 2 hour blocks, I would say, for every single week to understand what you need to learn. And so you might think, well, what does that learning look like? Well, the learning isn't limited to, say, reading a new book, or looking at a vlog like this, but it's about having real conversations. You're having conversations with your customers, for example, and you're learning what not only do they need, but what are they desiring? What are the services that you're not bringing that they're looking elsewhere for? Sometimes the learning is doing postmortems, right, on recent decisions. Lessons learned. What happened? What did you get right? What did you get wrong when you made that decision, when you invested that money? Sometimes it's about even talking to employees who may be 6 levels down to understand what's working in their world and what's not. So learning goes a lot of different ways. It's about obviously comparing your organization to other organizations and knowing what those benchmarks, what those metrics look like. So you want to do this. You want to do this on a regular basis, understanding, looking across the lane, inside of the organization, outside the organization to know what are you doing right, what are you doing wrong, and how do you need to pivot. So number 2, which is in accord with number 1, is listening to others. And of course, this is about learning as well. Assume that you're going to learn something by listening to others, especially those who disagree with you, who have a different perspective. They don't have to be in the leadership team. They don't have to even be a regular audience, right? But they have to be someone who you could get a different perspective from. So next time you have a big decision, don't just rely specifically on your team, but talk to other people about how you may or may not pivot on that decision, whether it's entering a new market or a big hire or a product pivot altogether. Don't just talk to the same people, go to the same audience, but try talking to other people, maybe even in different industries, in different markets, in different geographical locations and organizations. So your job is to understand not just what's comfortable, but also understand what you disagree with, what may be most painful for you to accept or to learn. Understand exactly what are you missing, even if it's just from a perspective, a personal perspective or other perspective. Listening, I would say, is the most difficult skill that I've seen of CEOs. So listening in general may sound like the easiest thing to do, because it requires less quote unquote action. But that's all the more reason I think it's the most difficult thing for CEOs, is because most CEOs I know are very action oriented. And so listening is the hardest thing. But that's how you're going to learn, is by listening. Listening to those who you least expect to have a perspective that's going to add to your own. And those are typically the ones who will. Number 3, which might sound like a contradiction from listening, but it's really not, and that is to over communicate. Over communicate always. If your people are confused, nothing else is going to matter but making sure they understand your vision and understand what you want them to do. If they're confused, it's not their fault. It's not their fault if you have many people in your organization who are confused regarding what they're supposed to do and how they do it. That means You either did not say the message clearly the first time, or you did not say the message enough. So sometimes, oftentimes, you have to become that chief repetition officer, if you will, to keep repeating what you said until every ear has heard. So when you're tired of saying it, your organization is probably going to still need to hear it at least one more time. So there are some things I would like you to write down. First of all, this is ABC for some, but new for others. Know what your vision is. As the Bible says, write a vision and make it plain. Know where you are going. Because if you don't know where you're going to end up anywhere. And that may sound cliche, but it's the absolute truth. Because there are so many different voices everywhere you turn, even as a CEO. And if you're not grounded in the vision of your organization, you're going to be leading your people in a direction that, quite frankly, does not make sense for your makeup. Number 2, measure where you are going. How far are you from it? How does what you're doing today align with the success that you say you want to achieve? This is going to be very, very important, right? And aligned with that, number 3 is making sure that the priorities that you choose are aligning with your vision and are getting you toward that success that you are measuring. So if you're choosing priorities that are not aligned with the vision that you have, and then you're going to measure, and what you're going to find is that you're not going to be moving in that direction. You're going to have a lot of fun things to do, things that are good to do, but they're not going to be aligned with what you desire for your organization. So with those 3 things in mind, you're going to make sure that you are incorporating this information, sharing this information with your people in your leadership meetings, in your one-on-ones, in your email messages, Slack messages, whatever tools you're using, Teams, Google, what have you, and making sure that everyone is understanding what the ultimate vision of the organization is, what are the top 3 priorities of the organization, and how are you all measuring success? So whether I'm an executive assistant or a vice president or a CEO, I should be able to say, I understand how my role is measuring toward the success of this vision, of these priorities of the organization. Number 4, the 4th habit is not just having a vision, but having visionary action. So visionary is not about having this sexy slide with a mountain on the background and you're climbing it and you reach the top and rah, you're waving the flag. Visionary action is about getting your hands dirty when you have to in order to reach that vision, even for the CEO. The CEO sometimes have to get their hands dirty. The CEO a lot of times has to get their hands dirty in order to reach success. So we want to know what 3 to 5 years look like for success. Now, I'm not one of those people, and I know a lot of people, and I understand where they're coming from. They dare make a 3-year strategic plan at this point, and definitely not a 5-year strategic plan, because things are changing so quickly. By the time they get there, the priorities are going to have to completely shift in order to reach that vision. However, I do think there's still significant value in building out a vision for your organization even 10 years from now, and identifying those high-level moves that are likely to get you there. Now, the key is you're going to have to be ready to pivot and have a team that's flexible and willing to pivot, because I agree, what you're going to have to do more than likely is going to change. Your perspective of what you're going to have to do to get there to that 10-year vision is more than likely going to change. But you should at least have a high level idea of how to pivot. And hopefully when you do have to change that plan, you don't have to change it in entirety, but you're making some iterative changes, because some things you're doing are going to contribute very well to those 10 years from now. What does that look like? Some people are like, well, what does that look like? A 10-year vision? What are you considering? Obviously, it's going to depend on the size of your organization, but you're looking at, for example, if you provide products, what do those product lines look like? What type of products are they going to need or even want and desire 10 years from now versus now? Like vehicles, for example. I know some people are using Waymos, the driverless Ubers, if you will. No disrespect to Waymo, but in the future, it may look like you owning cars now that are completely driverless. I know some people have those now, but in the future, it may be 80% of people want them, whereas now it may be only 10% of the population that might feel comfortable owning a driverless vehicle. So if you have a product and you have a company, you're thinking about what are those products that people are going to want. You're thinking about what new markets that you may be wanting to enter. If you're only in the United States, you might be considering, okay, am I going to enter into markets in Africa or markets in Southeast Asia? And so you're thinking about the markets that may work in the future, maybe 10 years from now, that maybe wouldn't work today. Partnerships that you might make, other organizations that you can partner with that complement what you do or expand what you do, and what critical capabilities are you going to need. So like, for example, right now, people aren't thinking about what robots am I going to need in my organization, or at least some CEOs are not, depending on what size. But I would venture to guess in 10 years from now, almost every organization is going to be thinking about what products, what robots are they going to need in your organization. So these types of things are ways you can scan and say, what is my organization going to need to do, to have, to be in 10 years in order to be relevant, in order to be successful? What does success look like in 2036 versus 2026? And so in addition to just scanning the future, you want to scan in different directions, right? The impact that is being made around you and that's going to be made around you, and what that impact should look like, what your impact on those stakeholders should look like, what their impact on the organization should look like. You're looking up at your board and you're trying to understand, well, how is the board? How are the investors? What are they going to want to see? How are they going to react to this vision or contribute? You're looking down, what does it look like from the perspective of those frontline leaders? What is their workload going to look like or should look like? What skills are they going to need in order to work with these robots that are going to be around 10 years from now? And you're looking around, right? You're looking, like I said, outside of your organization. What are other CEOs doing? What are they faced with? What are they grappling with? So you're connecting and learning from them as well. And I find it very interesting that a lot of CEOs are quite generous with each other, far more generous than you might think as far as exchanging ideas, because they understand that this ecosystem is a very broad one. And of course, you're looking out, understanding how these changes affecting customers, affecting partners, or how will these changes or visions affect customers and affect partners. And you're looking in the short term with regard to the next 6 months, the next year, but you're also looking at the long term as well, in the next 10 years, understanding you're not going to control everything that happens in the next 10 years, but you're going to be proactive and making an impact. And you're not just being dragged along for the ride, but you're making an impact, and you are doing some driving. You can't drive everything because you just don't know what the world is going to exactly be in 10 years. But there are some things you can make an impact on. And one thing I will say, in addition to that, from that strategic lens, taking time regularly to do it. So you should be taking 30 minutes every day and focusing on strategy, longer term strategy than what's going on right now, or else you're going to be in reactive mode. You're going to be constantly in reactive mode if you're not taking intentional time out to strategically build internally. The fifth habit is courageous decision making. Indecision, slow decision making, because you're indecisive, you're afraid to take risks. They silently tax your company, silently tax your organization every single day. This is the biggest difference in a CEO, and the responsibility that a CEO has that, quite frankly, the rest of the organization does not have. And that is to make very fast decisions for the entire organization, for all of those stakeholders involved. And yes, your decision may break quite a few things, but that is the reason why you're carrying that responsibility, and that you have that authority is because you're the one who's courageous enough to make those decisions. They're not reckless, but they are courageous. So let's talk about some rules in making really good decisions, because there are some rules behind it. It's not just about, okay, I'm big and bold and I can make a decision in 5 minutes, because if that's the case, we could get a lot of psychopaths to be CEOs, and we really don't want that. So rule number one is a 20-80, right? You don't wait for perfect data, but once you have that critical 20% of information that you know is going to drive 80% of that outcome, that's when you move. That's when you ask your team, what will we do right now? If we have 2 weeks to decide what will we do, and get their perspectives. But if you feel comfortable as the CEO that you have the critical information that is going to impact most of the organization, most of the future of the organization in a certain way, it's your responsibility to make that decision, especially when you know it's a decision that's going to have an impact with regard to the timeliness that the decision is made, which is quite frankly most decisions that CEOs make, because they're not making every decision, right? You're not making every decision, but you are making those important decisions that's going to have an impact and that where timeliness is involved. Rule number 2 is deciding at level. So right now there are too many decisions that might be floating up to you. And this goes back to what I just said. You're not making every decision. So make sure there's an understanding with the people who report to you, with those who are leading other organizations that you are associated with, where there is a clear reporting line to you or indirect reporting line to you, that they understand what you need to decide versus what they need to decide. Because as a CEO, you're not just a very expensive project manager, if you will, but you should be making those important decisions that are going to make the greatest impact, that requires timely calculation of very important information. And so rule number 2, like I said, is making sure that you're not making every decision, but you are making those decisions that are right at the CEO level. Rule number 3 is making sure that there's a decision date for every decision that you need to make. If there's not a decision date, I would argue if you feel the need as a CEO to not have a decision date, then it's probably not a decision that you need to make. It's not important enough for you to make it if it's not important enough to have a decision date. So whatever that decision is, whether it's even as big as investing in a building or hiring X number of people for an organization or investing in a new system, what have you, whatever that decision is that you're deciding that is appropriate at your level within your organization. Of course, that's going to be different depending on the size and complexity of your organization, but whatever that decision is, it should have a decision date. And you should know at this date, you're going to make a decision unless something critical happened, like a massive earthquake, right? Habit number 6 is practicing empathy. Empathy is not a weakness. And I know even today, a lot of leaders are more emotionally intelligent and they understand empathy is not a weakness, but there's still a lot of leaders who see empathy as a weakness. And you know what I see empathy is? I see it as leadership accuracy. When you're able to discern what other people are going through, understand the needs of others, value that, appreciate it in a way that helps you to relate to them, helps you to utilize their energies and their talents and times appropriate, that to me makes you more accurate and discerning, not weak. So when you have empathy, you're making decisions. It's not about making decisions reactionary based upon fear or loss, or because someone's emotionally hurt, but it's about making decisions with all data, and not just data that you see, but data that other people appreciate as well. And that is the power of empathy. It's really hard to listen to people who are different from you, disagree with you, who have tremendous value to add to you if you lack empathy. And a CEO, one of the greatest keys that I've mentioned earlier to a great CEO is one who can learn from others. Well, it's hard for you to learn from others if you cannot empathize with what they're saying. If they're saying something very different from what you know, it's going to be very hard for you to learn from them if you cannot empathize from their perspective. And so you're going to miss out from a lot of information if you can't learn from them. And you can't learn from them if you cannot empathize with them. So that's a very important piece, is to make sure you have empathy. And I know everyone does not maybe enter the game, so to speak, with the same level of empathy, but I do believe empathy is something you can work at. You can make an effort and you can build it and increase that empathy skill, because it's about listening, it's about paying attention, it's about making effort to care about the other person, and it's about curiosity. Empathy is not just about a feeling, but it's about starting with curiosity about the person across from you. And that curiosity leads you with that ability to empathize with that person and their perspective. 7th habit, and I would argue one of the most important habits. It could easily be the most important habit, quite frankly, in this season, and that is adaptability. What we do know is that this world is not slowing down anytime soon. And so your strategy is going to need to catch up. Like we talked about the challenge of having a 10-year strategy. And like I said, I think there's benefit in setting strategies even 10 years ahead. However, you cannot assume that because you set a 10-year strategy that it's going to be good for the next 10 years out, because everything is moving very fast right now, as we know. And we thought it was about AI, but AI is just one part of a very huge, fast moving puzzle around us. So as a CEO, your job is not to predict perfectly. Your job's not to build a company, right, that can just stand still and strong no matter what. But your job is to build a company that is flexible and that can sort of wave and bob and weave, with the wind as it needs to adjust to changing times, to changing environments, to changing climates. And you as a leader, you have to do that, because if you as a CEO cannot adjust, cannot flex, cannot adapt, there's no way you're going to lead other people, whether it's 5 or 300,000, to flex and to adapt as needed in order to survive and to thrive in an ever-changing world. So there are many things happening, and you're going to have to be able to shift. Whether it's customer needs that are changing, meaning customer metrics need to change, technology shifts, a very obvious one, regulatory changes that we're very aware of right now taking place in a very aggressive way, competitive behaviors that are unpredictable. There are very fast changes that are moving. And so as an organization, as a CEO, you're going to have to be able to adapt. You're going to have to be able to flex in order to not just thrive, but to even survive. And so in order to do that, you want to experiment. You want to test things out. There's new products, there are new needs. You want to survey, you want to get the voice of the customer, the voice of the stakeholders very often, and experiment with different ideas and processes and challenges in order to understand how you can continue to pivot in a way that's going to help your organization to continue to grow in a healthy way. So adaptability in action is not about a slogan, but it's very much the real deal about being ready to pivot, being ready to change, being ready to move. So you do not, as a CEO, you do not become an excellent CEO just by watching what other people are doing. You don't become an excellent CEO just about hearing what other people are doing or reading a book or even watching a blog. But you have to become an excellent CEO by being consistent in your learning time, being consistent in your effort to experiment and see what you can do better for your organization, and making decisions in a real time and not being afraid to push a button. These are ways that you become an excellent CEO, with all of these things combined in a consistent fashion, incorporating empathy and how you listen to people and how you make decisions and how you learn. So these are very important, and I'm not going to tell you, if you're not doing these 7 habits, that you can just do them all overnight. But what you can do over the next 30 days is assess where you are. You can assess how well you're doing these 7 habits, and where you're failing and where you need to do better. And what you're doing well in, quite frankly, because I'm sure some of these I hope you're mastering, because that's why you're still a CEO, right? And so in that respect, I think that there are tremendous strides you can make by just assessing where you are against these habits. And then you can build a plan of how you're going to tackle those that need particular growth in a major way. So if there's anything that resonates with you, that you've heard that resonates with you, please click the like button and or share with someone who you care about, and have an amazing kick butt day.